All right, thanks for joining us today for our on-location broadcast straight from IMEX America 2018, Contracts, Security Concerns. We have a great panel of experts here and a great audience out there. Let's, yeah, all right. Get them revved up. Okay, we have on my left Glenn Simpson, and next to him Brenda Rivers, and then finally Christian Hardegree. Before we start, I would also like to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Marriott Convention and Resort Network. And so let's start it off with the panel, and you guys can give us a quick bio and tell everyone what you do. Glenn?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Glenn Simpson. I'm the Director of Special Operations for Community Ambulance. We are a private emergency and non-emergency provider out here. We are also the providers for the Route 91 Harvest Festival and the big Las Vegas shooting that took place a year ago out here. Our team was contracted to provide medical services, so a lot of what you do out there, when you hire EMS, we were that provider, and so it's definitely been a learning process for us. We've taken a lot away from it. I've had the opportunity to plan events in this city since about 2004. Believe it or not, most ambulance companies have a special event division, and I have the opportunity to oversee that out here in Las Vegas.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Brenda?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brenda Rivers, and I am from Denver. I have owned and managed a meeting and incentive company for the past 25 years. I've been fortunate enough to do programs all over the world, and my passion is actually risk management. I have a legal background. I don't litigate. I'm not on that side. But everything that I do is really driven by making sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's.
And you've just written a book, haven't you, on the subject?
Yes.
And what is that?
Well, my passion the last few years, which I'll get into, has been to develop a practical and replicable risk management strategy designed for meeting planners.
Excellent. Thank you, Brenda. And finally, Christian.
So how's everybody doing? All right, good. So I'm Christian Hardegree. I'm a trial attorney, and that's a very different, people who negotiate your contracts, people who are in trial, have very different backgrounds, very different approaches. So I'm always playing Monday morning quarterback of woulda, coulda, shoulda. So that just means I stand around a lot and tell people what they did wrong, which my husband doesn't like. But anyway, so I'm from the hospitality field. I taught at UNLV for 15 years. I have defended hotels, restaurants, and nightclubs here in Las Vegas for over 20. Have engaged in quite a number of issues with safety and security, both from the meeting planner perspective as well as the hotel perspective. And so my lens is always we should have done this, we should have done that. And so hopefully I'll be able to add to some of the conversation today.
Yeah, and in talking with these guys before we started today, it was sort of like Brenda's the before and Christian's sort of the after.
I want to keep everybody out of her.
Exactly, right.
Exactly.
So let's start off the program. I first heard Glenn at ASAE's annual in Chicago, and I didn't know what to expect, but he was on site that day, and and I really can't say much more about it, so we'll turn it over to him and let him describe that day and his role.
Thanks. So as we mentioned, I'm the Director of Special Operations for Community Ambulance, and we were the contracted provider for the Route 91 Harvest Festival. This was a festival where there were 16 of us assigned to the event. And if there's anything, my big takeaway from this and what I try to tell people after the incident is the importance of pre-planning. There was a lot of pre-planning that went into this event. We didn't all just show up in our ambulances and stand around and watch a country concert and hope nothing happened. We had spent months working not only with the promoter, but hands-on with the stage managers. When you do a concert in Las Vegas, especially an outdoor concert, there's a lot of things to take into consideration, and we typically talk about wind emergencies, we talk about weather emergencies, because we're in the desert and that stuff happens. The day prior to this 3-day festival, we had talked about an active shooter and what that would look like. when you live in Las Vegas and you work in Las Vegas and you attract hundreds of thousands of people to our city every year, the conversations that we have with our community partners isn't a matter of if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. It's the reality of what we do. As somebody that's on the EMS side, you can imagine the burden that we carry when I go to sleep at night and when I prepare for events and I'm trying to put all these medical plans together and put all these pieces together. And Route 91's no different, right? And so that night was the worst nightmare that I could have ever experienced. In particular, I had woken up that morning. It was a 3-day festival, 22,000 people each day. We were at full capacity in the venue. Jake Owen had just wrapped up his act, and it was followed by Jason Aldean. So time in between, we get a medical call here or there. I am a country music fan, so anything I say here is not to insult the industry, but you can imagine the type of patients that we were dealing with at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night of a 3-day festival. Everything from alcohol to folks requesting sunscreen, where obviously the sunscreen at this point wasn't going to work. We had transported a handful of people, nothing out of the ordinary. It's country music fans, they tend to drink a lot, they tend to fight. And so there's some fights that had broken out, and nothing out of the ordinary. I was standing stage right as Jason Aldean came on stage. He was about 2 or 3 songs in, and I had gotten a call on the radio to respond to one of the gates that lead out of the venue right onto Las Vegas Boulevard. This venue in particular has a lot of intricacies. There's no on-site parking. There's nowhere for taxis to pull up. There's nowhere for the Uber, the Lyft, any rideshare program to pull up. And so I'd been called over for a guest. She had a little too much to drink, that's what we'll call it. She was there with her boyfriend, and they just wanted to go home. And so I had radioed over to Metro. What a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of resources on the ground. And when I refer to Metro, that's the police department out here. And we all work together. We develop these plans together. And so they had sent over some officers so we could flag down a cab. We were able to get her into a cab. It was at that moment that I had made the decision, perfect, I'm going to go home. I woke up with a head cold that morning, and my crew's got it. I don't need to be here anymore. And it was right when we turned around on Las Vegas Boulevard, walking back towards Mandalay Bay, that we heard what were the first few shots. It sounded like a few shots. It ended up being about approximately 90 rounds that were fired at us, more or less. We had taken cover behind a brick wall, and it wasn't until the officers had pulled their weapons that I was like, all right, this is real. This is happening. When you're on my side, a couple things come to mind. One, where are all my people at, and are they safe? And 2, I need ambulances because this is about to turn into a big deal. So I had made that call into our dispatch center. You know, what's unique about our organization is our radio system ties into the fire department system. So I'm not sitting there working on different radios. I'm not trying to get to certain channels. I'm able to just start talking and to get the resources that I need. And so I did it that night. How I got from one end of the venue to the other side of the venue, in my mind, when they released the videos from this incident in the next 10 years, because there's a lot of cameras, I picture myself running like a great athlete. I'm sure it's quite opposite, and I was probably screaming like a little girl running across the field. But it was at that moment that obviously you can imagine what happened to our first aid center. You can imagine what happened to our resources. To complicate matters, we began getting confirmed reports of additional shooters. So there was moments that we literally thought our city was under attack. At one point, we got confirmed shooters at the airport. Most of you flew into that airport, McCarran International Airport. You saw the size of that airport. You can imagine what it was like that night when the FAA all of a sudden saw people fleeing across the tarmac to the fire station with gunshot wounds and whatnot. So unfortunately, 58 people lost their lives that night. And while that's tough on our team, there were thousands of lives that were saved. And a lot of that was because of the pre-planning that we did. When we sit down with promoters, we talk about casualty collection points. It's a term that it sounds pretty rough, casualty collection point. I'm hosting an event and I have to have a casualty collection point. But that night, what a lot of people don't know is our usher team had been briefed on it, our security team had been briefed on it, and they began bringing patients to that spot that we had designated as that. We weren't able to utilize that spot because that spot was under attack. Every spot was under attack. We later learned in our after actions that no matter where we were in clear shot and within range of this evil person's ability to hit us with his weaponry. So definitely a long night. I could sit here for 2 hours and get into the nitty-gritty of it. We're proud of our team. Psychologically, it's taken a toll on our team. I had people there that it was their 3rd month on the job. I'm somebody that's been on the job for 10 plus years. It's nothing I've ever seen in my career. It's nothing that, I remind people consistently, it's nothing that I signed up for. It's nothing that we signed up for. I signed up to help people. I didn't sign up to get shot at, right? If I wanted to do that, I probably would have became a cop. But it is what it is. We're proud of the plans that we had in place. Did it go over perfectly? No. There was hiccups within itself, but overall, when you saw the numbers come out as far as the casualties, that was a number that it stuck. That number didn't go up. Unfortunately, it didn't go down, but that number didn't go up. And although it was unfortunate, we're proud of that. So I could go on and on about it, but that kind of gives you kind of a glimpse. It was a very long night. It was over 9 hours worth of incident time that we were involved in this, from the moment that first shot went off to the moment that we were able to send our crews home.
And even evacuating all the people, it was just crazy. They were even putting them into cars on the boulevard, right? And lift cars and such, right?
Yeah, so I call them the smart people. There was people that, as the initial shots were fired, pulled up Uber on their app, on their phones, requested an Uber, I kid you not, walked to right on Las Vegas Boulevard as an Uber pulled up, as shots and bullets are raining down around him, got in the Uber and drove away. So now I have Uber on my front screen on my phone versus like in a folder where I have to dig through, right? It's just something that you don't think about. And it's something that I've shared with folks that, as we pre-plan for events, are we inviting the rideshare companies to the table? Mm-hmm. Right? It's a resource that we can use. The public is going to want to help for the most part. We had the perfect setting. We had a lot of off-duty firefighters, a lot of off-duty military folks, retired, active, police officers, et cetera, et cetera. We had a lot of the right people there that wanted to help, and you're going to find that people want to help. And so do you have a plan in place for when that takes place? It was further complicated in that we didn't know somebody was shooting from the 32nd floor. We knew somebody was shooting. We know the direction it was coming from. We thought it was a ground assault. As the noises changed, we thought there was multiple shooters at one point. And so there's a lot of complicating factors in that. We later learned that part of the reason it sounded like multiple shooters is because the sound system was never shut down. So the mics were still hot. There's delay towers, so you're hearing just a lot of delay. You're hearing people screaming. You're hearing, bullets. You were hearing them hit the ground. You were hearing them hit people. It was certainly a multi-sensory event as it unfolded.
So, how do you plan for something like that? I know, talking with you, Brenda, and you, Christian, before this, is that it's a subject people don't even really want to address, an active shooter, and they don't want to have active shooter drills before their meetings. Who wants to start off a meeting like that? But I mean, what can you guys say to your colleagues out there? What do they need to do, and what do they need to think about, and what do they need to put in their contracts?
Well, I can start out from the risk management strategy standpoint, which is something I've been working on since 2012, when I'd been through all types of crises, including a homicide, but this was Hurricane Sandy, and I had planned with my team for this 2,500 person event, and 2 days before we were told Sandy was changing course, it was going to hit our event. We had lots of deliberations and meetings with all the stakeholders and the executives, and when the CEO turned to me and said, Brenda, tell me what to do. Should we cancel the whole event, or should we move forward with half attendance? And as the meeting logistics person, I think many of you in the room can understand, I was just struck with unbelievable anxiety, sense of responsibility, and regret that I had not been successful in getting that client to the table way before the event to sit down and talk about a plan. And I think that Glenn hit it on the head. Regardless of what part of the hospitality industry we're in, we have a heightened sense of security and safety right now that is never going to go back. We're not going backwards, right? Our world is what it is. It's always going to be uncertain. We're always going to have weather issues. We just have to get used to it. And so we have to really look at how the meeting and event industry manages risk. And that the essence of that is It is the risk management strategy, which is pre-planning. It's getting everybody to the table in advance to talk and to share all of our partners, the DMCs, the hotels, the venues, the convention centers, all of our activity partners, the trade show organizers and the AV production people that we work with, right, to put on our event. They all have some kind of emergency plan if they are the kind of company you want to be working with. But guess what happens? In the middle of the program, the lights go out, or there's a bomb threat, or you get a message, as I did one time, that the CEO was being threatened. It turned out to be a hoax, thank goodness, but you have to treat it the same way. And I didn't know, I didn't know exactly who to call or what to do, even though I'm the planner, but everybody's looking at me to know what to do. So this is where we get into the contract part and my legal background, which I'm not a litigator, but I try to keep everybody out of that. But this is where the contracts can really help. And it starts at the RFP process when you are sourcing your destination, and as part of your obligation to the client to research the destination, and in the RFP, put in a clause that says, if we contract with you, hotel or venue or DMC, if we contract with you, will you agree to participate in a pre-event safety and security process? And that includes disclosing to us your non-confidential, that's really key, because a lot of times they go, oh no, we can't, that's confidential. Your non-confidential emergency procedures you will share with us, and you will participate in pre-event rehearsals. And if they're not willing to do it, as a meeting planner, I think you have to take a step back because we do have an obligation, and that was part of my drive, frankly, to do some legal research after I was put in this position with this CEO. The event went on, by the way, at half attendance, and that's when we pulled out the contracts. Did we have the right force majeure language in the catering contract, in the hotel contracts, in the convention center? Force majeure, you can't take force majeure at face value. If you don't have legal counsel on your team, then you really do need to go to your boss, your supervisor, the executive who's sponsoring the event, and you need to say, I have an obligation to point this out to you. I need help in understanding whether or not we have the proper force majeure clause. And I'm not going to go into all of the rest of the things you should do, because that's, I think, what Christian's going to talk about too. But I've always added this clause in our hotel contracts to say, you agreed to participate and to share your emergency protocol. And I'm getting more and more response from people that say, we've never been asked that by the meeting planner before. And that's why I know we're not talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And yet once you ask them to come to the table, even the police, I'm working with a large program in New Orleans next year. We had our first meeting with the client, and I invited the head of the district in the French Quarter, who's going to have his team on duty for this event. He actually flew to this client's office and participated in our initial meeting to discuss what the police would do in the event. They had demonstrations, they have alcohol, they have a lot of partying going on. And so once you bring them to the table, they're all in, and it's not as hard as you might think. So pre-planning and having a risk mitigation strategy, most of your work happens before the event. And yes, you do need to have the crisis management part, but that comes in your preparation.
And Christian, you're the one that kind of has to deal with this in the end of the process as an attorney. So why don't you tell some people, some of the mistakes you've seen that have wound up there, what clauses they should make sure and inclusions are in their contracts, and how much responsibility a planner has to take versus a facility. It's all about duty of care, right? And everyone has to be pushing this. But what is? I guess there's also crisis management. There's risk management. What's the difference between that? You have all the answers, so I'll turn it over to you.
I teach college students, and I feel like you should be writing the essay questions with all the triple parts to that.
Exactly.
So the contract provisions are incredibly important, and not just from the aspect of what language do you include, but when you're talking about managing risk, that's a very broad aspect. And certainly active shooter is going to be on one end, food poisoning may be on another end, and what about sex trafficking? One of the clauses, and I spoke yesterday, that I talked about is I always have a clause in my contracts where we're having the vendor sign the code and train their staff to identify what appears to be sex trafficking. Because there's a major risk from a brand identity if it turns out that your conference is when the police raid, freed 13 women from the hotel that you were utilizing as part of your event. And again, that's part of managing the risk. Having a clause in there about the requirement for AED defibrillators on site, and the fact that so long as you're not sitting around seeing who can last through the biggest jolt, if you're engaging in the use of a defibrillator in good faith, that you're protected from any kind of liability in the event that it malfunctions. When we look to what do we do? If we've put a clause in there that says that you're going to give us the risk plan and your response plan, and then the hotel doesn't, well, to me, that's great. I can say, well, when I'm defending the planner, we requested this, we put it in the contract, they're in breach of the contract. At the end of the day, everybody's going to be brought in. The hotel's going to be brought in, the meeting planner, the group, and literally they're going to leave it up to the 12 people who couldn't figure out how to get out of jury duty to decide who has what percentage of liability. And so it comes down to what's in writing, what was negotiated. Did we follow up with hey, I haven't gotten the plan, we're 30 days out. Hey, I haven't gotten the plan, we're 12 days out. Hey, our meeting is scheduled for this. We're never going to have it perfect. You said there were some missteps that occurred. You know what? They're not going to look for perfect. They're going to say, did you reasonably anticipate risk? Did you engage in efforts to mitigate that risk? For planners in particular, I think looking at the insurance aspects of how do you try to reduce your exposure to that risk. Everything that we do engages in risk. That's why everybody in here who drives a car, you have some insurance in your glove compartment, and you might kind of know what your coverage is, but you really don't look at it until something happens, right? Well, this is an area where we need to be in advance knowing what does this coverage provide and what types of aspects are we going to be liable for versus a venue, what clauses in our contract. That literally, the contract can solve so many of the issues. Because by the time I get it, I'm dealing with incident reports about what happened, and hopefully you have an incident report. I just saw a gentleman fall in an establishment, cracked his head open. The guy who was the manager on duty had no idea how to respond. His incident report was a piece of white paper he pulled out of the printer, and he was just handing it to some people to write down some information on their name and phone number. And this is a national company. So do we provide crime stats for an area? Is that available on the app? Are we being transparent about issues that may occur? If it's an all-inclusive in Mexico that's had 11 people die in 6 months from a single beverage, and it turns out that over 800 gallons of illegally made tequila, which actually is poisoning people, has been seized by the government. Maybe we should tell some people who are heading there in the next few months, hey, by the way, make sure you watch them open the bottle. And if we provide it in the app and people don't read it, we've still provided the information. So there's some responsibility for the attendee in their own managing of risk. And they're going to a certain locale and they're drinking and they're choosing to engage in maybe marijuana in a jurisdiction where that's legal. So you just need to make sure that you have delineated what those risks are, that you've engaged in active protocols to try to mitigate those, and that your contract provisions are written so that they protect you in the best manners they can. There's no perfect language at all, but you got to try to have those in a way that's the best coverage that you can get.
Well, thank you. And Brenda, what are some of the greatest roadblocks for implementing a risk management strategy?
Well, again, I'm speaking from a meeting planner's background. The biggest roadblock is something I call perceived confidence versus capable confidence. And by that I mean that if you poll people at the executive level and meeting planners even, you'll find that 70% of most executives, if you ask them, do you think your organization is prepared to handle a crisis? They say yes. And meeting planners, about 50% will say yes. But if you probe and you ask more questions, well, so can you show me, did you do a vulnerability study? Did you identify what your risks are? Do you know exactly what should go into your crisis management plan? No. Does your meeting and event team who's handling the logistics on site, do they know their roles and responsibilities in a crisis? No. They don't even know their roles when they're supposed to go on site. They know they're going to go help, right? Do you have crowd control issues? Did you put those along with alcohol management? Did you put those along with potential hecklers and demonstrators? Are they all in your crisis management plan? They all say no. So this is the difference between perceived confidence and capable confidence. That's the biggest stumbling block. Once you can get past that, then you can start to integrate a risk management strategy.
Thank you. And Glenn, one note you sent me before we began, as we were beginning this process, was the importance of AEDs on site. And I'm thinking that is probably a relatively simple thing people can do that could really save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the increase in active shooter incidents, a lot of the training you're seeing, and maybe you haven't, but it's stop the bleed. Similar to how we made initiatives to get out there and train people to do CPR, there's now initiatives out there to train folks how to stop the bleed. And it's a very simple process. I can tell you that we spend time with a lot of our meeting planners and a lot of our promoters to take the hands and the boots that are going to be on the ground, and to teach them the simple act of applying a tourniquet and trying to reenact that. And to Brenda's point earlier about the police officer that joined you for the meeting, if you don't ask, you never know what they're going to want to do. I can tell you right now that when we're invited to the table, we'll be at the table. It's imperative to us, because just as important as it is for your organization to look good, I can tell you that it's important for our organization to look good. In the moments that followed, we had CNN at our door. We had Lester Holt in our building. We had that media train, that media beast, right, if you will, that came into our building, and we had one of two options: to ignore it and potentially look bad, or respond, and to begin responding. And I will tell you right now that the media will find you, and they will find the people that they need to talk to. And I'm talking every media outlet, everything from, we had BBC in our building, we had French News, never heard of it. Every organization, local affiliates, national affiliates that wanted to know. And it at that moment, as the incident was unfolding, it didn't necessarily matter that it was MGM Resorts International. It was, who were the providers that were there? Did the police do enough? Was EMS where EMS needed to be? And so it's imperative that we look good. So I'll tell you right now that, understand the capabilities of what companies you're hiring. From sitting on my end, I know that meeting planners have to go down that checkbox, and they check off, do you have first aid? Oh yeah. And I've had meeting planners that are mad that they've had to hire us. I've had meeting planners that don't want to meet me because they're like, oh hey, you just have to sit in that room, you just have to be available. We'll get you if we need you. Okay, but it's imperative that you understand what the capabilities are. I work for an organization that we can go from really small to really big, really fast. And who are you hiring? Are you hiring somebody that just has a certification that's working out of their home? And what they're going to do is, I like to call them the professional 911 caller. Or are you hiring an organization that has plans in place, that has insurance in place? I enjoy when a meeting planner challenges my insurance and wants to know, well, we got to look at these minimums, we got to look at these different pieces. So very important information to look at.
And we have a question that just came in from the audience. What size of event should you start to consider having folks like Glenn participate in, I believe it was?
For me, there's a lot of, it's more than a yes at this number or no at this number, you don't need us. It's really a matter of, what type of event are you hosting? Is alcohol going to be served? What's the demographic that you're looking at? What are the resources like in the city that you're working in? I have promoters and meeting planners that come to Las Vegas, and they want 6 ambulances. Well, you're in Las Vegas, and when you host your event on the Strip, there's a lot of ambulances at any given time in that area. So do you really need that resources? Versus if I go host an event that maybe doesn't have as much resources, what's my impact going to be? I can tell you that most of the time, if you reach out to an organization, they'll offer the advice at no cost to you. You know, the public agencies will offer advice to you. The private entities will offer advice to you. But for me, there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's what your clients expect. You know, some of it I look at it as a concierge service. You know, calling 911 creates a scene. And so what would it look like if I have 2,500 people and I have one person on staff? So I think that number is kind of all over the place, and I don't know if you could kind of pinpoint it. Obviously, for what I do for a living, I would tell you that, you know, if you're hosting an event over a couple thousand people, you should probably start having those conversations.
And we were talking earlier about, yes, Christian.
I was just going to say all of them. If at the point that we've hired a meeting planner to plan the event, we're at a level that we need to have somebody on site, because it only takes one instance when somebody's injured and we're not responsive enough. That's going to pay for itself once, and so my recommendation is every time.
Yeah, and you should get your organization's attorney.
Absolutely, and I mean, I will echo, you know, the level of that may depend. You know, if it's a group that predominantly is over 60, well, then you may want to have more. You may have more falls. You may have more heart issues or things like that. If it's a youth group, you know, maybe it's a different type of response aspect. So, I mean, the demographics of it, where you're located, the other resources certainly factor into that. But I'm going to have a very difficult time in front of a jury saying you are a professional meeting planner. You had an event for any number of people and you didn't have a qualified medical responding technician on site. And especially when somebody comes in and says that's $300 a day, $500 a day.
Right.
So and the plaintiff will say you're so fixated on profit, you weren't willing to spend $1,500 to save a life.
Well, and what I had happen one time is they pulled out the bill. This was in a mediation. They never got to a jury, thank goodness, but they pulled out the bill and they asked the executive, and how much did you spend on wine?
Yeah.
You spent $300 a bottle for this event and you couldn't spend $35 an hour on an EMS? Done, right?
And I'll tell you that we're in a lot of different settings. So if you partake in any of the nightlife in our city, we're on standby at a lot of those nightclubs. They hire us, probably mostly from litigation purposes, I'll tell you that. I send a lot of documents and I get subpoenaed a lot of information that has to be sent over. So we're there. So, you know, especially in a city like this where it's almost expected. And I imagine it's like that in many other big cities where it's expected to make sure you have those resources there and make sure they're part of your plan, right? Like I hate when a meeting planner meets me on like the third day of their show, right? Yeah, we signed all the contracts, yeah, we're there, but then we meet on a third day, or God forbid, we meet on a day when there's a big incident. That's not when I first want to make name and face and match those up. So involve us early. We're nice people for the most part, and we're there to help, right? We all sign up to serve our communities and to ensure that things go off without a hitch. And I can tell you that when you come to Las Vegas and you utilize an organization like us, you know, my goal is to remove any of the medical headaches from your plate. That's my job. Let me interact with the lawyers. Let me do that. Let me be that resource for you.
And I think in a destination like Las Vegas, you know, people come here and they let their hair down and they want to have some fun. And even at your meetings and events, a lot of times you'll have an open bar. People are away from home. They might act out or act differently than they might when they're not having so much fun or being, frankly, so inebriated. So I think that's an important consideration also. And Brenda, so, you know, maybe let's take it down to a real simple sort of level. What 3 critical actions can a meeting planner take to develop a risk management playbook for their events?
Well, this is a question I get a lot. Most planners that I work with, you know, they go from really like depressed and frightened, and I had one planner say, I didn't sign up for this. They are dealing with their own fear and panic about how are they going to react if there's a crisis. But the first thing where you need to start is you really need to get your senior executive who's in charge of your events to the table and you need to try to find a champion on the C-suite team. And usually it's HR. Sometimes you don't have legal that would get involved, I've seen, and not until something's bad. But get your senior team, the people that are signing the check, that are approving the budget, get a meeting with them and tell them that it's your responsibility as their in-house planner, or if you're a third-party planner, which I can talk to, that's another issue. That's your scope of services with the client. But get them to the table to really talk about, we need to have a risk management plan. Here are the things I need to do, and I need to start with getting your support and your approval. And the first thing they're going to say, I know, is how much is this going to cost?
Exactly, yeah.
And so you have to be ready for that, and you have to have done your due diligence on the location, your destination, on your hotel, on the subject matter of the meeting, on your kind of your risk factors, and you need to have those in a document, in just an easy memo. These are the things that I believe that we have some risk for. And there's always the top ones. You always have medical. You never know when medical's going to come up. You always have a threat of power outage, of fire. You have those regular ones, and now you've got on the other end, not likely, but you've got to be prepared. The random acts of violence that can happen anywhere in an open forum. So you have those ready for the executives, and you need to have your business case. And you say, this is what I'm going to need. I want to create a risk management strategy for our event. Again, you quantify this by the size and the demographics of the event, obviously, but you've got to get your champion. And then I have a solution if you never can get the champion, which I know the reality is many times you won't get them to come to the table, right? Not until something bad's happened. So there are other things you can do. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is what I've already talked about, is get those first responders, engage them, get their emergency protocol, go through it with your team. Your team. It's important that you do this with your meeting and event team that's going to be there, executing the meeting with you, and create what I call is like the 10-minute test. So if all your people on your team don't know what to do in the first 10 minutes of any of these crises, and that means not they have to save the day, but they need to know, and you can condense it down to a wallet card, and they can program it into their phone. Who do they call? I go, who are you going to call? Who do you call? How do you reach them? What do you do if your phones don't work? What do you do? That white phone, that house phone, that's often like, call the house phone. I can't tell you how many programs I've been on, big hotels. I've gone to the house phone because somebody's choking. They don't answer. So you prepare with your team. And then the third thing is you've got to have a crisis communication plan. I don't care how rudimentary it is. You have to know immediately when something goes wrong. How do you communicate with your attendees to tell them if you need to say, this is what we're doing, everything's okay, we're going to hold off on the meeting for a bit, how do you keep going? You've got to have a basic crisis communication plan in place. Know your channels. Know who's going to handle social media. This is a part of today. Any meeting is going to be, at risk for having a social media blow up. Mm-hmm. So, pictures go out, it's the wrong impression. Your brand is at risk. And that's one of the arguments you can make to your executive about protecting your brand, protecting your investment, is that you can turn a social media blow up around and make it a way to enhance your brand, to show the world and to show your employees that you care about them, and you cared about them by putting a risk management plan in place, and you knew what to do and you took care of it. So just like the other side of risk is opportunity, right? Our whole lives, like you said, our lives are full of risk, but if you don't take risk, you don't live, right? And there's opportunity always in risk. If you prepare for it, you involve the right people, you bring people in early, you educate them, and it doesn't always have to scare everybody to death. I know that it does. I mean, I know it's a tough subject. When you'd all rather be out there, going on site inspections to all those fabulous properties that are in the trade show floor.
And Christian.
Well, and most of the time when I speak at conferences, I do scare the devil out of people. Nobody has lunch with me or anything like that. They just avoid me, don't make eye contact. So I'm gonna add in a couple little pieces. One is the aspect of training, particularly training for on the site, and one is the aspect of sometimes saying no. I had a situation. My nightclub was hosting the snowboarders convention. Now, if somebody from sales had come to me and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this, I would have said to myself, little tiny adrenaline junkies. Yeah, no, don't want those. Sometimes the best thing to do for certain types of businesses is say, yeah, I don't need to be involved in this. I had on the second floor of our nightclub, snowboarders leaping off of the railing, grabbing wires, swinging across the dance floor like Tarzan. One particular gentleman who had a little bit too much to drink, which when you only weigh 112 pounds, that's pretty easy, I guess.
I know.
But that was just his hair.
Exactly. That was the spike on his head. But he's stealing beers out of the beer tub, and he's accosting my cocktail server. And so security comes over and says, sir, I'm sorry you've had as much fun as you're having tonight. It's time for you to leave. And he wraps his arm in the stairwell railing and says, make me. Now, this would have been an excellent opportunity for my security to do a very simple thing. Call the police. Let him stand there and be a jerk, call the police. But instead, 8 burly, adrenaline, steroid-fueled security guards decide they're going to show dominance over the little man, and they decide to make him. My favorite part in the deposition, it's one of the greatest quotes from a deposition I've ever had, I fought like a wildcat, right? And he acknowledges that he just was trying to tear these boys up. At one point, we have him zip-tied on the floor on his stomach, and he's trying to bite people. I mean, how great, from a fact perspective, that's wonderful. I'm enjoying this so far until my security picks him up Superman style into a door like the ones at the back and uses head to open it. And then later drop him on the floor and crash out all of his teeth. Now, first of all, I'm not going to get this lawsuit until 2 years after it's happened by most statute of limitations. So going back and trying to find the security guard who worked for you 2 years ago, shockingly, once you terminate them for other reasons, they don't call you back and tell you where they've moved to, right? And then how do I find witnesses or the incident report? Because people don't typically write down, he fought like a wildcat, so we kicked his butt, right? When you have somebody who testifies and who acknowledges the wrongdoing that they engaged in, but then has specific testimony of what else occurred, and clearly the training was not in effect. There's no documentation of the pre-game training for this particular group, and this particular group deserved a different level of training. Now we're just talking numbers. Now my job is to get it as low as humanly possible, just to make it go away. So you've got to train people on site with what to do, how to engage, what to document, when to document it. For God's sake, spell it right and use proper grammar. It's really hard to say you're a professional when you put 2 F's in the word, right? So I'm talking to a jury about how great our standard is and how professional we are and how we've exercised all the appropriate duties of care. But when my documentation doesn't match that, or when I don't have documentation of training or what we've done, I'm at a disadvantage. And so it's really important that you think about those aspects as you go into it and how everybody has been trained in terms of what their obligations are and what their duties are.
And there's nothing like training where you put people in a room like this, and out of the blue, we turn off the lights, or out of the blue, we get the fire alarm goes, or out of the blue, you do this with executives. This is how you get the executive buy-in, is you invite them to a nice lunch, and you're going to have a meeting, and you're going to talk about it, and then you have something happen. And I mean, I was at a table one time at a hospitality law conference, and all the people at the table were lawyers from different major hotels, the lawyers, right? And we went through a crisis simulation that was a shooter in a large meeting. And we were asked at the table, did we know what to do? And none of the lawyers, I mean, they're high-level corporate lawyers, but they had no idea. They said, we don't know who we would call, because there's nobody in the room, there's no security. So you want to put them in a crisis simulation, and it isn't scary. I'm not talking about the kind where you actually have gunshots. You can go to that next level, but until you're there, you don't know what comes up for you. You don't know that limbic response. And sometimes if you're in charge and you're the head planner, the people that you think are going to be the best in a crisis are the worst. They fall apart. So you think, oh, I can count. I think I could count on her, right? But you don't know. You don't know. I think I probably could. But you don't know, and you don't know your own reaction. You don't know what you're going to do. I found out the hard way that I'm one of these people, sadly, that, you know, when everything is just awful, I can somehow, I don't know how I do it, I just rise to the occasion, and then I fall apart later. And then I have people that are just so great in the day-to-day stress and all that, and they cannot handle a crisis. I mean, they can't handle it, and I have to take care of them. So.
Yeah, I guess you need to know your team and their capabilities, which is probably hard to judge, right?
It is very hard.
Christian, I mean, what are some key contract clauses that people might overlook that you think they should really put in there? And also, I mean, you know, we might have broached this earlier, but a lot of people think, oh, the facility's responsible for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's a really great opportunity for you in your contract negotiations to include those elements of who's responsible for what, because otherwise you're just arguing about ambiguity later down the road. Mm-hmm. You know, when you look at research shows in the last 2 years, the #1 insurance claim related to meetings and events is weather. So, you know, we've been talking about some very, very traumatic types of aspects, but statistically, you're probably more concerned about a tornado or a hurricane or something of that nature. So you may want to have language in there that specifically, not just within your force majeure clause, but specifically goes into those elements of so I'll give you a great example. I had somebody, we had a conference that was canceled 3 days after the cancellation, a hurricane hit. And the hotel wanted to say, well, the hurricane hit after the conference would have started, so your cancellation was not a force majeure. But if you have a requirement to get out, evacuate an area, then you don't do that the day it hits, right? You do that several days in advance. But if your force majeure clause is written that just, you know, in the event of a hurricane, well, what does that mean? Does that mean 3 days before the hurricane hits? Does that mean 5 days before? You know, so today in Atlanta, for example, Snowmageddon, right? People have PTSD over the fact it snowed 4 years ago, and enough snow that people from Denver would kind of sneer and go, you know, but for Atlanta, it shut it down, and it's gotten to a point that if flurries are going on, it's a mass exodus from everybody's building as they're heading home, because there were people who were stuck on the interstate for 3 days. I had people at my university who literally had to live in their offices over 3 or 4 days. I knew one woman who walked 12 miles to get home because she wanted to let her dog out, which I admired that. But if you're hosting a conference in Atlanta and it's going to be in January and there's the risk of snow, you may have a hotel that has no staff show up. Mm-hmm. You may have no food and beverage because the trucks aren't coming through. And so particularly in those regions, you need to think about what additional explanation. Why can't we just use some common language in a contract? By this clause, we mean blah, 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 and general format. If you want to give it to the attorney to legalese it up, that's fine. But at the end of the day, what I'm often arguing is what was the spirit of the intent behind this clause, as opposed to everybody trying to do heretofore with as one word. You know, you don't need it to be that big. And then, of course, the AED defibrillators. By law, any healthcare or fitness center is required to have an AED defibrillator, right? So only if it's the primary purpose of the business. Hotels are not required to have them. Colleges and universities are required to have them. So we've got a legislative aspect that's not real clear. If a hotel has a fitness center, it's not their primary business, so they're not required to have that on site. But yet there was just an instance in San Diego where somebody ended up having a heart attack and 2 people ran out and were running up and down the halls trying to find the defibrillator. And they just couldn't believe there wasn't one there. And one of them was a journalist. And ultimately, the 2 of them went on a fundraising campaign to provide defibrillators throughout the city. San Diego's done some great work with that. It was a national initiative. Hartsfield Airport has defibrillators at every terminal. So at some point, when somebody dies at your event and you don't have one, they're going to say, why not? Because all you had to do is put a contract clause in there requiring one. And you can rent them. You don't even have to buy them. And so you need to think about all aspects of risk, not just the really horrific, but the things that are more like when 350,000 people a year have a heart attack and twice the survival rate if you've used a defibrillator, why aren't we putting those in? And particularly with an aging population.
And especially if you have an aging demographic at your meeting.
Absolutely.
That's going to come up in any litigation.
Or snowboarders.
Or
Right.
snowboarders. Or even worse, is skateboarders. I know a few.
Yeah, I mean, as a meeting planner, it's not defibrillator as well as knowing who will operate the defibrillator. Is it up to the meeting planner to operate it, or should the meeting planner know who to get to come in and operate the defibrillator? EpiPens are another issue. I mean, how many of you always know that you have an EpiPen in your meeting, your on-site kit? Okay, we now put them in our on-site kit, but guess what? The legal side of it is we have to have permission, right, from the affected party to administer the EpiPen. So that's the whole thing that goes into how are you filling out your emergency contact and your medical forms from the
And if
attendees.
somebody's not in a state to give you permission, which side do you
Right.
err on?
So you ask for it. That's the key. In your registration, you ask. You have that whole, disclosure that they can opt in or opt out of. But if you have that in your registration information where you ask, do you have any known allergies? Would you give permission to the administration of an EpiPen? And if they don't check that, then you've done what you should do, what's reasonable. Yes.
Right, but at the same time, you ask that question, and then I have 2 kids with severe nut allergies, which is why I always have them with me. But you're not going to stop and say, oh, wait, did they check the box? Like you're going to have,
Right.
I need a report for that.
Right. No, you're going to do
I
it.
think that the
You're going to
risk
do it.
of
Right.
not administering it far outweighs not,
It could still be a legal issue, though, right? If I'm going to try to help the person.
Right. We all are.
And that's where you have to make that decision for
We all
yourself.
are, yeah.
I have had cases where somebody has sued us because we didn't put up the yellow cone when we were mopping a small area, and this was very close to a wall, so much so that somebody literally had to cut through to step in the area to slip and fall. I've also been sued when somebody tripped and fell over the yellow cone. So the reality is whether somebody brings a lawsuit is not really something that you're going to have a lot of impact on. It's what's the jury going to resonate with. Most jurors are going to say, you screwed up trying to save someone's life. I'm with you on that one. Versus, I didn't think they signed the form, so I didn't give it to them. While that may be legally right, I think a lot of jurors are going to have a hard time embracing that.
You could make it a restriction when you register for the event that you cannot pass go until you say yes.
Well,
Everyone.
then it's not a contracted clause, and so it's not real permission. So
even so, how are you going to, in the middle of...
But your point is, well, you're going to find the form. No, you're going to do it. You're just going to hope that they sign.
2,000 attendees, like, how am I going to know?
But to Brenda's point, if you haven't talked about who's going to administer it, you don't want to be standing over someone. Well, Brenda, you do it. Well, Christian, you do it.
But during the registration process,
Right.
we need you to say yes to this. Otherwise, you can't continue on with your registration.
So if that actually went to court and somebody said, hey, look, I really wasn't giving voluntary permission. It was the requirement to attend. My work requires me to go, so I had to click yes. A court could set aside, even though somebody clicked the yes or did the check mark. So the court looks to, is it really a bargain for exchange versus a one-sided contract? One-sided contract provisions are generally stricken. But I totally get where you're coming from.
And how many things can you have in the small print for people to sign off on it?
Well,
You can have a
How many
whole novel.
people click
That's
I
true.
agree to terms and conditions?
Right,
Yeah.
but that's true, but I think the meeting industry in general, given the fact that we have all this great technology with CVent and ways that we can communicate with our attendees who we're responsible for, as well as the mobile apps, we can do a better job of putting things out there, whether or not they take it or not. It's like asking for emergency contact information. That is so important, as we found out when Sandy hit, and we didn't even have the degree of technology in 2012. But for us to be able to run a list of all attendees and emergency contacts when we had a person in the registration line who was unconscious, he looked like he'd had a stroke, and he didn't have his wallet on him, and we didn't really know how to identify him. Finally, we found out who he was, and then we got his emergency contact information. He filled that out and gave us permission to call someone. And that, it's just like we need to do more as an industry to at least give the attendees knowledge, information, and ability to tell us that they've got allergies or to tell us that we can use an EpiPen. If they don't want to, you know, that we can say we made this available and they didn't do it.
And so, from my perspective, I'm more concerned about you're coming to a conference, you've identified the food allergies of your children who are coming to the conference as well, and we feed you something that's cross-contaminated, or that you know is within that area of issues, or B, what a lot of people don't realize is that food allergies are covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so. If you are not providing gluten-free alternatives or peanut-free, no cross-contamination, you may be violating ADA. And so, you know, again, that's one of those things that a lot of people wouldn't think about in terms of the clauses that they have in their contract.
Well, thanks, you guys. We have only about a few more minutes to wrap this up, so I think I'll ask our wonderful panelists just first, any key takeaways? Is there any little piece of information you want to tell our audience they should bring away? And then one thing quick I thought I'd bring up is we were talking before this about 911 and how sometimes we've all been trained since we were little kids when something bad happens called 911, and Glenn was saying that's not always the best idea. And then what's the takeaway you can give everyone?
So for me, the answer to the allergy question is hire EMS. That's what we do. That's what we carry. But make sure who you're hiring has that, right? Our company is involved in some litigation right now over some pieces of that. As far as 911, a lot of people do realize this, some don't. Most cities now have enhanced 911. So when you call from your phone right now, no matter where you're at, that GPS, it sends out a GPS signal. If you know anything about GPS, you know that it will not put you exactly where you're calling from, whether it'll get us from a dispatch center to a certain spot. One of the challenges we have in Las Vegas is, no offense to anybody in this room, but right now, if somebody were to call 911, could you tell us exactly where we're at? Could you tell us if we're in the Sands or in the Venetian, and where Casanova is, and whether we're on level 1, et cetera, et cetera. And so what it does is it gets us to the intersection. So part of the plan is making sure that you have that communications plan, right? And having those modes of communications. One of my frustrations as a first responder is, meeting planners. I know they don't really exist anymore, but they'd use Nextel phones for their staff. But when they show up to Las Vegas, they forgot to get one for us. Well, how are you going to get a hold of us? Well, I don't know. Well, I can call the phone that's in your first aid room. Okay, I won't go to the bathroom or eat at all today. I'll just stay there and wait for that phone to ring. So having those conversations, and I think my takeaway is what I started with: pre-plan. There's people out there that want to be part of the conversations. I'll give the sales pitch on my company. If you come to Las Vegas, my organization is more than happy to talk to you. And let's start having those conversations, and let's have those uncomfortable conversations.
Brenda?
Yeah, I'm going to second the pre-planning, but I call it risk management strategy. I know it's overwhelming, but meeting planners can do it. Just create a tab in your working agenda for your meeting. It's part of your planning, like hotel room block management, food and beverage, speaker. Make risk management there. And if you put nothing else, identify your risk and create a written plan so people know what to do in the first 10 minutes.
Christian?
Document. And if you have questions, give me a call.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you, Glenn Simpson, Brenda Rivers, and Christian Hardegree. And I'm Tyler Davidson, the Chief Content Director of Meetings Today. And thank you all for joining us in on-location digital land and in the live audience from IMEX America. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you. We're here at IMEX America with the sponsor of our on-location broadcast today, Amy Popper with Marriott CRN Network. Thank you for joining us, Amy.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And I understand there's a lot going on with you guys. Why don't you fill the readers in on that?
We are excited to announce a couple of new innovative things we're doing with the CRN, and it's really based on what planners are looking for and what we've heard from them. The first one is Marriott's Mastermind. Do you want me to go into it a little bit?
Yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah. So what we've learned is meeting planners are a lot of times connected socially and online, but not as much in person. And really trying to give meeting planners, we're trying to give them a community that really inspires creativity, and it's a peer-to-peer mentoring community that we're creating on behalf of Marriott, where we're going to learn and then really want people to leave feeling inspired, empowered, and like they can actually push the limits on meetings because now they have a community that has their back and really is going to support them in doing so.
And you have so many planners that use all your properties. It's sure to be a lot of people on there communicating, huh?
Absolutely. So we're going to have 4 groups of 8 to 10 in the first pilot program just to test it out, see how it works. But we just want to connect our meeting planners. We kind of feel that responsibility as Marriott and as the CRN to further the industry. And what if one meeting planner comes up with a great idea, it helps all of us.
And then why don't you tell the audience what CRN is? I know it's like, I always say it's like the thoroughbred of Marriott and convention properties in general.
Mm-hmm. So Marriott's Convention Resort Network is a group of 110 hotels and resorts in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean, partnered together to make more seamless meetings experiences is kind of the way we say it. So what that means to our meeting planners is if it says CRN, you can count on these hotels do group all the time. This is their specialty, this is their expertise, and not only are they going to provide you excellent service, but they actually work with each other to make sure meetings that bounce between hotels, they're sharing information. So you can have the most seamless experience possible and know what you're going to get.
Oh, totally. I mean, and they're really high-profile, luxurious properties also.
Yes. And we try to make it to my vision this year for the CRN is just really, I said evolution, and my leader said it's more like a revolution of how we're changing meetings. So it's still Marriott. You can still count on all of the basics, and it's CRN, so you can count on excellence. But now we're trying to blow them away with creativity and really push the industry where we're leading the effort in the new way of meetings.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Amy. It's always nice seeing you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Tyler.
All right. Thanks for joining us today.